everyone joining us today. Thanks for tuning in to the promise of deep tech, data-driven approaches for efficient patient care presented by SGInnovate and StartCentral, and in support of Deep Tech for Good. I am Zing from SGInnovate. We are a government-owned organization that invests in and helps build deep tech startups that leverage science and technology to make lives better for all. A big part of our work is to build a global community of leaders and doers who are driving deep tech innovations, such as AI, cybersecurity, medtech, quantum tech in our economy and society. We are excited to have our panel of experts from Health Catalyst, Hallmarks, Cytiva, and KW Advisory here today to discuss how a data-driven approach can bring us closer to a more transparent and sustainable healthcare system, reduce healthcare costs, and promote better collaboration in the healthcare ecosystem. We would like this to be an interactive session, so if you have any questions, do post them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and please feel free to use the chat box to connect with our wider community. Now, let me just hand over the time to Susan from StartCentral to share more about the exciting work they're doing. Susan, please.
Hi, everyone. My name is Susan from StartCentral and A-Star Enterprise Division. So for those who are not familiar with us, StartCentral is an open innovation platform by A-Star. Our focus is to incubate and accelerate the growth of deep tech startups, and we also hope to bolster the startup ecosystem with the help of partners like SGInnovate. We also foster the interaction between researchers, corporates, startups, investors, and entrepreneurs across diverse disciplines. So we encourage you to reach out and connect with us. Without further ado, I will pass the mic to our moderator today, Dr. Karen. Dr. Karen is the Managing Director of KW Advisory. Dr. Karen, please.
Thank you so much, Susan. And good morning to everyone. So I'm Dr. Karen White, the moderator for today. Brief background myself, I'm a physician by training. I've spent majority of my career dealing with healthcare data in big and small companies. And in today's age, there's just so much data being generated, but how are we using the data in the best way possible? And that's what we'll be exploring in this webinar, the promise of deep tech, data-driven approaches for efficient patient care. Now, I have with me three distinguished panelists. I will hand it over to them to do a quick introductions of themselves, starting with Dr. Joydip Shankar.
Good morning, everyone, and really excited to be here. Everyone calls me JD. I work at Hallmarks. We are a behavioral health focused company here in Singapore, but we work quite globally, and I've been with the company for about 4 years. My background's a biomedical engineer. I studied in US and then worked for 11 years before moving to Singapore to work with Hallmarks, and really excited to be here. Sean, off to you.
Thank you so much. And likewise, it's very nice to be here and learn from everyone. I'm from Health Catalyst. I am the Vice President of Analytics. And Health Catalyst is, we're hoping to transform healthcare by enabling and being the catalyst for massive, measurable, and data-informed improvement. And my background, I'm technical by background. Recently graduated from Harvard University with a Master's of Public Health, and I'm just relocating to Singapore right now. I'm currently coming from Korea, but we'll be in Singapore soon. So looking forward to meeting everyone. Rajan? Rajan, it looks like you might. Yeah.
Sorry, we're still learning this technology. Yeah, good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me here. I'm Rajan, General Manager for Cytiva ASEAN. Just a quick intro on Cytiva. We are a newcomer in the industry, but we are formerly GE Healthcare Life Sciences. We are proven past from 1733, 60 years of biopharma experience, what we carry. And, we are having a new journey under Danaher from April 2020, this year. And, our customers, undertake life-saving activities ranging from fundamental research all the way to manufacturing, innovative vaccines, biological drugs, and novel cell and gene therapies. Okay, and we are supporting them with our, tools and service and solutions for them. I've been in the industry for the last 27 years, and my background is engineering and management. Looking forward for the session. Thank you.
Excellent.
Thank you, Karen.
Thank you very much. So I think We're going to start it off really, really simply, but I just wanted to set the stage yourself for the future discussions and maybe just get a roundtable. What is your idea of a data-driven approach in healthcare from your perspective? And maybe we'll start with Rajan this time around.
Yeah, let me start a little bit about the play of biotherapeutics in the industry, Dr. Karan. It's a very important part the therapeutics plays in terms of controlling the healthcare cost and giving a quality of life for patients. Am I right? And that shows in COVID as well. And where we developed the vaccine so fast, it kept the world safer, I would say. Now, biotherapeutic by itself, it's got a big promise for the healthcare. Am I right? And we know that by 2025, 50% of prescribed drugs is going to be, biotherapeutics products actually, and they are complex science and has complex processes. Am I right? And we know that in pharma, it's a data-driven, and data comes from different sources, and it has got a huge play as well. And to organize this data, streamline that, and also make the best use of it is going to be very challenging and daunting task actually. And that's where the data management, the play of digital comes in big ante with AI. This with the R&D experience what our pharma customers carry with this automation AI, data-driven technologies which to support them can really accelerate the journey of drug discovery, I would say. It really helps our R&D scientists to identify the drug candidates quickly, faster, and also take it from there with digital twin technologies. We could possibly accelerate the drug development path actually for. And these, the time to market when we are trying to be better and be faster, I think that really adds a lot of savings in the entire process of drug manufacturing, I would say. And COVID, I would say that has accelerated the digital journey by multiple folds. Actually, it has really told us, the need for faster innovation, is at this moment. Am I right? And that's where the data-driven approach, bringing the data science into the pharmaceutical play, it's going to be super critical. Am I right? Looking forward, that's how I see what's the play of data going to be.
Very good. And I think it might lead nicely to you, Sean, in terms of how you guys are actually working on streamlining a lot of this data.
Yeah, it's a great question, right? And I think when people think of data-driven, typically where they go is, we need to build this fancy dashboard with AI and NLP built in, and it needs to have all these bells and whistles. And I think, I would say emphatically that is not what data-driven healthcare is about in my mind. Of course, it's a small part of it, but just having knowing a lot of jokes doesn't mean that you're very funny. And I think the same thing is for healthcare with data. I think there are three things that you need to have in order to have a really successful data-driven organization. The first thing is, yes, the efficient distribution of data, which will be your dashboards, your AI, your machine learning, but somebody has to take on that work. And in my mind, it is the governance and processes that take that data and do something with it. And it's the trained physicians, it's the trained nurses, that care team that actually grab that data. So we like to think of it as data-informed improvement because they're the ones driving the care, the data isn't driving it. And then the last thing is the culture of improvement. I think it's the most overlooked part of data-driven or data-informed healthcare delivery, is that it's really hard to look at data and not react negatively to it. And it's a learned skill as an organization to be able to look at data and know that there's room to improve.
Excellent. So I think Joydip, if you could share your perspective.
I have to tell you what I can share. That is not repetition. So I will say something that will possibly sound weird. Personally speaking, I don't like the terminology data-driven care. And the reason why is because you actually can't drive care based on data. You actually drive care or changes or anything based on, in the medical field, based on what would be called evidence. In the business world, that would be called insight. Within the medical field, the word evidence carries a lot of weight. And going back to Sean's point, before we generate anything, we need to know if we have the right data to actually, the right amount of it, the right quality of it, to be able to generate evidence that's robust and actually can be trusted. We need to understand what are the considerations or situations under which the data was generated so that it's actually being interpreted the right way. And all of these, and then ultimately, once you have the insight or the evidence being generated, it is being delivered or presented in a way that is easy to comprehend, easy to ingest in some ways, and also at some level actionable. I'll give you an example. It's a very classic thing that every machine learning guy loves to do is to build a risk model. And they will build a risk model, and the doctors or anyone was like, and so what do I do with it? They have not thought about that. It really doesn't help. I have all the data in the world and nobody can do anything about it, right? So I think we have to really peel the onion a little bit and ask ourselves, how do we actually solve problems rather than just produce more data and just produce more numbers around it? And I think that's the crux of why nothing happens.
Fair enough. And I think this speaks sort of like to me in terms of evidence, and you want to call it evidence or insights or whichever way. But I think if you look at it and to the general public out there, they are, they are at the level where they're looking at data. Right, data's been pushed onto them, a lot of it, and if you can share any examples, and I'll share one first before sort of like we go into more the technical sort of like side of it, and if you look at, how would I say, more into the wellness kind of like segmentation, you find companies like Calm, Noom, and all, and a lot of the data is what I would call dirty data, right? It's just data that you collect and you try and pick something out, a pattern, a sequence, and you label that as evidence. And I think, Joydip, you spoke about, you really need to know where the data is coming from, how you collect it, how robust the data is, if you could use that term, right? Maybe if you want to share examples from your end, what would be you consider the best practice in terms of how one would go about sort of like doing this sort of like data collection and then make it into evidence?
I would say, so, it's funny we actually talk about it like that. The truth is that we have to actually start exactly the other way around, which is, what's the problem I'm actually trying to solve? If we don't know that, then we don't know what data we need. So that's one. We also have to think about it from the perspective of the reality that we can't just ask for more data to be entered. That just doesn't work. Right? I mean, whether it's patients, consumers, or anything, if you keep asking them to enter more things, they won't. So we have to work within this kind of pragmatic field about, on one side, what is the question I'm trying to answer, and what is the data that I can reliably generate? Quality is a separate question. And then you work on, how do I improve the quality? I think if you ask me, it is less about, there are ways we can obviously improve the sort of the reliability of the data, the number of data points you're getting, such that it's not a single sample. How many samples did you take? A lot around that, like the statistical power behind everything that we're doing. But a lot of it comes down to governance and transparency. Like, how did I actually go from wherever the hell the data was collected to the number I'm generating? And I think a lot of it breaks on that part. It sounds funny, but that's where most of it falls apart. And so if you can actually, in a very transparent way, show this is how the data was generated, this is what it meant, and this is how I have gotten from there to a number that you are looking at, and this is what it means. And it doesn't always have to be super accurate. That's the other part. There is a tendency to always go for the most complicated models that will give you a 95% accuracy. It's less about that. A lot of clinicians are more happy with a 75% accuracy model with an error bar around it, because they know how to deal with uncertainty, because they do it every day. They would rather have something that they can understand intuitively and have that transparency. So a lot of it, I would say, is focused more around that middle part and the interpretability. There are, I mean, if you look at, there are more and more of these are coming around, depending upon the specific examples. There is more even regulation that's coming, at least in the US, on data transparency, on data governance, that it should not be a black box. It is a very important part of what we as companies or as an industry have to be able to provide and literally lead the charge in some ways, such that the end users feel comfortable using it. Today, a lot of it is black box. And I think that creates even more hesitancy in the population.
Rajan, do you want to weigh in terms of, I guess, one of the points that Joydip brought up, and you really don't have to go to high accuracy rate, right? But I think when you're working in certain regulated sort of like environments, that is the expectation before one actually goes into some of these. So help us understand that, it's going to be a dilemma when we go out there.
Yeah, I think Joydip has put it very nicely, but it's in healthcare, particularly in drug manufacturing process, the data, the evidence is very, very critical, Dr. Karan. That's super critical. But, but in the process of making that, sometimes we take quite a bit of time, right? That's where we need to bring these digital solutions to, bring in the speed, at the same time, drive necessary evidence to make sure that, we are doing things right, faster. So I could quote some of the examples, right? In a drug discovery chain, the process development is a very important part, and normally our scientists have to make multiple experiments to get these things correct. Am I right? And that's where there are areas where we could use the data, effectively with digital twin kind of technologies. For example, I can talk about Cytiva. We recently acquired a company, GoSilico, which use mechanistical modeling. Am I right? Where we do help our scientists with just 3 experiments or 4 experiments using the simulation software to create that kind of model where they'll be able to narrow down the experiment. Instead of doing 100 experiments, you can reduce down to few experiments, use a simulation. And then from there, you can just go down to get more evidence based on that, final run you would like to do. You see, in this process, what you do is you save quite a bit of time. So I agree with Dr. Joy in terms of, you can go with some accuracy, where, you can quickly run through that stage. And from there, you can drive some evidence to make sure you are able to narrow down that final scope what you're looking at it. So it's a kind of balance, I would say.
Sean?
Yeah, so I think maybe going to Joydip's position, where I think a lot of organizations start from a low level, collecting very minimal data quality, and then they try to do something extreme with it. They'll say, oh, we want to build this crazy model, but the data is garbage. And it takes a lot of work. It takes governance and processes to get to a point where you can trust that data. And unfortunately, it takes time. The physicians have to know and understand where the data is coming from. Because I think, seeing an alert that says, this patient is at risk of something, that alert comes up like, 600 times a day in a physician's workflow. So they have to know exactly what that alert is and how it came to them, because most likely it'll be ignored. So, but yeah, I think that organizations can build that competency, but the expectation has to be set that it's hard work and it takes time.
And maybe if I ask now, if you have seen or come across best practices, and it could be in your organization or elsewhere, in terms of how people have been using and we'll call it for the sake of the sort of like the title of this sort of like webinar, data-driven approach, right? And I think Rajan did share in terms of some of the modelings to try and get faster drug discovery. But if you could start, Rajan, how fast have you improved this, right? That it will then add to patient care because the drugs are going to get out there faster.
See, if you're looking at, Dr. Karan, a conventional method, right, in terms of current research practice and getting the drug product to the market, the discovery phase alone takes 3 to 6 years. That's a normal current system, right? But with the support of data science, right, combining our R&D experience, what our scientists have already with this, data science exposure, I think we could possibly, make it much faster. I can quote an example. This is a collaboration between, Dynipon and also Exscientia, where a drug discovery process, which is normally 3 to 4 years, with this AI support to R&D scientists, we're able to get down to a year. Am I right? And that's a significant savings in terms of you are launching a drug product to the market. Now, in terms of the CMC, we call it the particular drug development process, all the way to the getting to the patients. If we can bring innovation with digital twins, in terms of the complete automation support. So these are parameters when we implement properly, it saves quite a bit of time in the complete drug journey. And I would say that, with these tools coming in, you could possibly take from the current we call it CMC, right? Chemistry controls, I'm right, 7 years, all the way to after time. I would say that if we can bring in, but I also want to be very careful here, because this is new for our industry, right? We are going in there, it is new. We need to be open about this. This technology is coming to our industry, and then use the maximum in every segment of our value chain, and we could possibly accelerate the drug journey process, I would say.
If I can add, I mean, Karen, I think to a certain degree you can approach it from a, like there are when you develop a software, right? There are very well-known, established, good practices of developing a software. So like you document, you keep track of changes, you don't have 15 branches all over running around. You always have one master, that is the final version that is getting used, which is being tested in staging, tested in production. There are very good software paradigms. In the same way, if you think about it, there has to be that you come up with the design and an overall architecture of your data processing and modeling process before you do it. You don't do it and then figure out what the hell did I do. You don't make changes offhand. So if you follow some of those very well-established software engineering principles when you are doing this, a lot of it becomes very easy. But the challenge is often that the people who develop, let's say, machine learning models and all of that don't come with a software engineering background quite often. Data engineers have a different, so there's a difference in the backgrounds and the training of different people. So whoever watches over it ultimately has to have an organizational culture of driving such sort of things across the table, to say, okay, how was this developed? Did you come up with this a priori, or did you just develop it without an understanding of how the hell? And so we have to control the chaos in what goes on, and I think that will get us there.
If I may add a little bit, Dr. Karan, on what Joydip was talking about it. See, if you look at the cell and gene therapy, which is a novel therapy which is coming into the world now, we know that it's usually a manual process in a cell therapy at this moment, and that really takes time as well as takes the cost of developing that therapy. Am I right? And that's where we have this kind of chronicle kind of solution. We basically built a complete software platform which has a complete electronic batch records to ESOPs, all the way going down to the connecting the hardware which is needed in the workflow to the integrated logistics. So when you have this kind of pre-built platforms, it really helps our drug developers go faster and being efficient. In fact, we have installed this in Thailand for one of our customers, which we are sure that is going to take them faster to the market. I think this is something just to develop what Joydip was telling. We need to have this kind of platforms which really makes it very efficient for our drug developers actually.
Excellent.
Sorry, I just took a minute.
Yeah, brilliant. And Sean, I think Joydip brought up something that maybe touch upon one of your earlier points in terms of culture, right? And how one has to bring the organization along in this journey. Do you have any examples to share where you have been part of the journey on this, and some of the best practices that you've seen out there and how to get this started?
Yeah, a lot of organizations that we've worked with have struggled with this, to be honest. And I think some of the best ones that I've seen have it start from the top, where you have a humble leader that recognizes where they have issues, and they're transparent with their team members. They recognize problems and they talk about it openly. I think setting that example as a leader just naturally flows down to other leaders, because when you're in a space where it's constant competition and you're just trying to beat everybody else, it's a really hard environment to be collaborative. So I think it's really important to set that tone of collaboration and transparency from the top, and then making sure that it's instilled in every team member from that point. And it's really important for us at Health Catalyst. Our CEO, Dan Burton, does an amazing job of this. And it's important for our clients too, that we are those humble type of employees that really try to foster collaboration. So, and maybe just adding a little bit to Joydip's comment earlier, I think that a lot of organizations, when they do go down this path, they really struggle with understanding how they're able to tackle some of these bigger problems. And I think that when they actually pull down all their data and just work from the bottom, they'll be able to slowly and incrementally get better. But it starts with data.
And then maybe if we dovetail down back to you, Joydip, and you talk quite a bit about getting the right sort of like understanding what your outcome you want to have first, right, at the very start, and then building everything and the support systems around it. Now, if I could ask from a personal, so how much do you challenge yourself in terms of setting that outcome? And for example, if I could go back to what Thomas used to do in the past, let's say for diabetes, right? How much do you challenge yourself in terms of maybe improving HbA1c by 30%, 40%, whichever way? Do you set that kind of target when you go into a project?
Actually, the challenge is not that. So I definitely, okay, setting a low bar doesn't really help. Then you will never cross it. Let's put it that way. We only learn by failing. So I don't think we have a problem with that. What I was talking about when I say the problem we're trying to solve. So I'll give you an example. Since you brought up A1C, I'll pick a specific example, A1C. And the question is that predicting somebody's A1C into the future is not really useful, because that doesn't tell the clinician what to do with it, right? And predicting it, what the A1C would be in 1 year from now, is also not useful, because they don't care about it, right? So the context in which you are making the prediction, the risk of, we do risk models. Risk stratification is the most common application across everything that you do, right? And then you ask yourself, okay, I made a risk of something happening in the next year. Why? Because the data looks like that. I built the model like that. What is actually ultimately useful for the clinician? Is it useful for the clinician to know what can happen in the next year? No. It's actually useful to him what will happen in the next month or next 2 months. So if you didn't know that, you wouldn't know if the data is there to be able to build the solution that you're asking for, right? And even the modeling methodology that you might even use to get to that answer could be very different if you just knew the question better. And then you can ask yourself, okay, if I predicted it, is that enough? Actually, the answer is no, it's actually still not enough, because the truth is it's not actionable. Okay, then you have to ask yourself, okay, what is actionable? Well, what is actionable is I want to really understand what I can do with it. Now that, in the sense that the doctors might say, where is this coming from? Is it that the patient is not eating well? Is it the patient is not taking the drugs? Is the patient not exercising? Now you can ask yourself, which of these I can actually answer, which of these I cannot answer with the data I have today. Funny thing is, we have a tendency to go for the moon, and we always say that, oh, I want to answer all the questions, but I don't have the answer to those questions, so I don't want to answer any question. And we'll wait for all of that data to be collected when we can get to that answer. It's a very common thing to say. But the funny thing is that the doctors are very pragmatic because they don't get this data either, right? So if you tell them that these we cannot answer, this one I can, I have to wait. I know what's going on. I don't know whether it's activity or it's diet. I have no way of knowing. But I can tell you it's a combination of the two. That's the problem. Well, they're more than happy. Right? So it is about setting expectations in that way is what I'm talking about. That you can say, and sometimes it's a very common thing in Singapore, let's say, for weight data to not be structured. Who knows why? Don't know. It's an unstructured piece of data that's buried inside the notes. So if you don't have certain capabilities, then you might look at the structured data and say, well, the data is not there. I can't do anything about it. Blood pressure data is only available inside the unstructured data. Well, if you know what is the problem you're trying to solve and you have those abilities, this is where it starts multiplying the value of what you are trying to bring. Because even for a clinician, it's not realizable that they would go back through notes and find their blood pressure and their weight 2 months, 3 months back, and then pull it all in their head and get an answer. This is where, as data-driven care, if you may say, really brings the value, is to say, well, what is it that what we can do? And these are the places where we can make the biggest differences.
Now, something came in on the chat that maybe I'll address now because it was sort of like directed to me as a medical trained doctor. How would doctors use the data? And I think Joydip, you talked about it quite a bit, but maybe let me share a bit of light to the audience as well. You must understand, right? There are guidelines in the medical profession that have been built up through the years to protect patient safety, right? And those guidelines are, while they are guidelines and you can obviously divert from them because the human biology is very, very complex, one has to follow to a certain degree. And sometimes if the data and evidence that comes to you might not have been translated into guidelines yet, you take it on your own prerogative as a clinician looking at the patient to do the right thing. So, and I think one thing that Joydip touched upon, that there are many data layers in healthcare. Right, Joydip has talked quite a bit about more patient-centric kind of like data, and that could be biology type data, it could be environmental type data, right? Things that have not really been incorporated into the holistic system of medicine right now. And Rajan really talks really at the fundamental, when the drug discovery, how does it interact at the biological level? And Sean talks more of an organizational level. So there are multi-layers, and while we won't be able to cover it all in 1 hour, but understanding it's a complex system and data could lie everywhere in terms of how one would improve a patient life, right? And so, ultimately, it's, everyone is working in the right direction. It's just that how one would look at the data as we go along. And I think the panelists have already said, you really start with transparency. Sean brought about that. The culture really has to be there. You need to embrace the data. Rajan looks about incorporating collaboration, bringing in new things and, improving the whole process. And Joydip talks about really holistically from start to finish. What exactly are you looking for? And it needs to be collaborative with the other stakeholders, because it's not an individual company or individual that can change sort of like how we actually move forward. Okay. So let me take it now to, and I think all of you have talked about a bit of the challenges sort of like one has faced, but if I could sort of like drill down, what do you think is the biggest challenge now as we go forward in terms of sort of like data? And I would say repeat any points that you brought up if you think that that is the main one that will be stopping sort of like progress.
Sean, go for it.
Sean, if I could sort of
Sure.
highlight yourself.
Yeah, so I think there are, I guess one we've kind of already touched on, and that is that it's easy to fail in healthcare if you don't have a secure data strategy or governance in place, and especially in the U.S. Where they're undertaking this value-based arrangement. It's really complicated, and you need to have a great data strategy. And I know that, in the APAC region, I think a lot of healthcare organizations will start moving that direction. So it's even better to start now. The other thing I'd say where it's constantly an issue is the data access and security. And it makes sense, right? Where you've had these public data breaches in Singapore, and so organizations are reacting by reining in on all data access. But unfortunately, for improvement to happen, you need it to be this healthy tension where security and access can coexist. I think that's something that severely limits the utility of the data right now in the APAC region, and specifically in Singapore.
Yeah, I would say, I would echo something like that, similar in the sense that hesitancy comes from a few places. Security, privacy concerns. Privacy concerns in the US, privacy concerns go a long way. Then there is also this whole idea of, especially with the whole Facebook and sharing of data and targeting of people from 4 years, 5 years back. I think that has raised a lot of eyebrows. So there is a lot of extra hesitancy about what is the data getting used for, and who will have access to what, and how could they use it. Instead of, and maybe I'm an aberrant in this, but instead of approaching it from a perspective, why the hell are these barriers there? I think the better way of approaching it is to understand where these come from and to address them upfront. Be transparent about it. Be very clear about what is the purpose of the data that you are going to use. How are you going to safeguard the privacy of the people? And you can see also that the regulations are catching up. CCPA, the new California regulations, are even stricter than GDPR. I won't be surprised if Singapore changes PDPA and makes it more like GDPR, even harder, closer to CCPA. There are already 3 states which are close to CCPA. So the move is towards greater protection of the privacy and the use of the data for people. And I think we have to find ways of just approaching that in that way. That how do we protect these things? What data leaves the firewalls of the patients, of the hospitals? And as Sean talked about, security questions are always there. No system is foolproof. So the real question is, okay, your system is hackable, my system is also hackable. And it's not a question that, it's a question of, am I taking the right measures as a company to show the IT teams on that front that I will match whatever your security standards are and more. And if you do that, most of the time, if you do that and that transparency and that trust you can build up, I think people start opening up.
Yeah, Dr. Karan, I think I would like to see these challenges, maybe a couple of challenges I would like to highlight, particularly again, focusing on, pharma space as well. See, it's highly regulated environment right now, which supposed it should be. And it is also an existing infrastructure, what we have at this moment, the big pharmas, to go into the digital path, the hurdle is pretty high. It's going to take some challenges to do that. And that could be one of the challenge we need to address immediately. But that's where I feel that the new startups, in this space who are coming in could have this design thought from the beginning so that they can bring in more digital so that they'll have a better journey ahead. That is one thing I see it. Number two, our industry with right now are competing with the data science, getting talents for talents, particularly data scientists, we are fighting with, mites of Google, Amazon, all this to get talents into our industry right now because we need to bring data science in it. And that's where I think there's a lot of need for collaboration. In fact, we did a recent survey, focusing on multiple countries. Singapore is one with Financial Times together. And we found that in our environment, particularly even in Singapore, there is a lot of opportunity for bringing more kind of collaborations. That is where I feel that we could bring in the pharma, the tech companies, right, together, into multiple collaborations. With creating ecosystem of collaboration could, address some of the challenges on the talent constraint and could accelerate the industry as well.
Excellent. And there are two questions, and one of them I think will delve into what we were just discussing with regards to security, right? And sharing of data, and it comes from Lisa, and she's asking, are patients more open to sharing data with the onset of COVID, just because patients are more incentivized to support medical innovation? And from a data privacy point of view, are we more vulnerable to data breaches? I mean, we've touched about that, but Rajan, if you want to start on this one, just, have you seen that people are just more willing to share data?
I'm afraid I may not have an answer that on that space, Dr. Karan, because we do know, for example, let me talk in our space. The clinical trials, it's such a big challenge for us, right? We do know that getting patients for clinical trials is a very big challenge, in our industry. And that is particularly, looking at a rare disease, when you want to treat a rare disease, right? To getting, patients from that space. How do we do it in a better way? Clinical trials, we do have a big challenge, but I know I may not be able to have a clear answer on, whether, patients are still struggling to give the data. I do not know.
And I think it's okay.
I don't think patients actually are wary of sharing their data. That's the best part. We don't see that. Actually, if you're talking about specifically patients, and you tell them that we can help, and they can see the value, most of them will. So we do not see a challenge, and I don't know necessarily that. I mean, COVID has changed that particularly. I think what COVID has done more, I would say, is reduce well, I would say two things. One, in a very selfish way, I would say there's a lot of focus on behavioral health right now. So everywhere where we go, we just talk about behavioral health. Everyone just says, immediately starts nodding. But more importantly, the openness of healthcare organizations to digital solutions has definitely gone up. So many organizations had to move from a traditional, brick and mortar or face-to-face clinics to a telehealth or system, literally overnight. And they understood the value of it. And many of them will possibly never go back fully to a face-to-face consultation again. So that it is a disruption in that way, that a lot of changes which would have taken maybe 3, 4, 5 years to happen over at that scale has happened over a very short period of time. And once you go over that hump, then you realize, oh, I can actually do this. This actually works. Okay, then I can be more open. So I would say privacy question, breaches, honestly speaking, there's no escaping it. There is no system in this world. I mean, if people can breach Pentagon, who are we, right? That's the right way to say. I was actually talking to our CTO because one of the questions was around that to see, well, what is his perspective on this? And it was like, and the funny thing is, I've heard him say this so many times, that it's actually not about the technology, it's about the people. You can put every possible thing in place, and you will always have people who will click on that stupid link in an email that will come. We all know we're not supposed to do it, and still you will find some people doing it, right? So can we prevent it fully? Likely no. The question is, can you at least find a way to organize your data such that even if people get access to it, they only get access to some of it and not all of it? How do you architect your solutions to do that? I think there are approaches that are coming up more and more, as you would say, an onion model, more of a layered model of security that are being built with many different types, but nothing is foolproof. Let's be real.
And if I can just add to that, so to the point of having people click or employees click on links, we set up a regular cadence testing for simulated phishing within our company, where you send out a random email, could be from the CEO saying they changed the dress code, and you have to click on it, right? But it's building that skill of knowing and looking for little cues of knowing, is this real or is this not? And if there's a chance, then report it. And no matter how complicated your infrastructure is, you can't escape that.
And I think, you guys are right. And this is anecdotal. And if anything, this whole entire cybersecurity thing, right? It's I've seen little data out there to show that, the need for some of the policies coming out, right? A lot of it seems to be knee-jerk reaction to really highly publicized sort of like breaches. And, they were all human-based breaches, right? The technology does what a human would tell it to do, and humans are the ones that build it. So fair play if you want to crack the code that someone else built. But I think in terms of sharing of data as well, again, from a clinician point of view, when I was working and I did clinical trials, Rajan, for quite some time, and everyone is okay sharing the data as long as they know what the data is being used for, and not nefariously sort of like to ding them in the future. And that's what everyone's afraid of, right? Using it without permission. So understanding, consenting the patient correctly to actually get the data, and fair use of the data after the fact. I've never seen or personally never had anyone refuse to give their data.
In fact, we're actually in the process of changing even the way we present that consent form, or even the terms and conditions of a software that you always say agree, and that's like 3 pages long and at font 5 that you can never read. How do I provide an executive summary in the first page that people know what the hell we're talking about, and then have the rest? We're even getting to that point of really leading the charge of how do you make it easy for people to understand what the hell they're even saying yes to.
Very good. So, I mean, we have really gone straight into the Q&As because they're coming in. So the next question, with the public healthcare sector holding the bulk of patients' data, how can corporates and startups work better with the public sector to make use of all the data? That's question number 1 from Tanya. And there's a second question, are there existing platforms that this is already being done, or is it more so on an ad hoc official partnership basis? Not sure who can take this one. I know a few just based on what I work, but Sean, Joydip, this might be in your sector. You want to have a go?
Sure. So the thing is, actually, the hospitals actually are open to working on some of these. And are there existing platforms? I don't think they're. I mean, I wouldn't call them platforms right now. But are there de-identifiable databases of the data across multiple systems, all just dispersed, that you could get access to be able to do this? I think we're getting closer and closer to that possible. More and more systems are being brought online. I would say the conditions under which you can get access to do some of these things are not congenial yet, mostly because I think it's a slow process of getting there. But it's being done, and I would say that Singapore is not far behind in terms of actually being able to work with external partners within certain conditions to be able to do that. It's not that bad.
Yeah, and I would say just from the research perspective, I have heard of potentially some opportunities coming up where they will be able to anonymize this data and allow researchers to look at that. But I'm not aware of anything that'll be available for startups and corporates, but it's a really interesting question.
With through collaborations, I don't think it's a free for all that you can get access to. It's never like that, because you can imagine that data at the end of the day, medical data, there's always the question of the use and the ethics of the use. So most of it at least in Singapore, falls under an IRB regulation, and you have to go through some kind of ethics approval to do work on it. And there has to be some people who are supervising all of that, and there's a collaboration perspective, but it can be done. The hurdle is not that bad anymore.
Rajan, could you share, in terms of the clinical trials and how would get the data, right, if your patients were coming from the public side, what does Cytiva, I guess, give the audience a understanding of the clinical trial platform and the data collection that one needs to sort of like take in?
Yeah, Dr. Karan, Cytiva's play is more than on the clinical trials. We play quite heavy in terms of supporting our customers in the drug development path. Am I right? See, what we are doing, particularly, I would say, in the cell therapy space, where all the data, clinical data, has to flow back into the system. There, we play a little bit heavy in terms of automation to support that particular space. Actually. Apart from that, in terms of clinical trials, it's normally Cytiva, we do not get into that particular space at this moment. So my exposure and expertise on that is pretty limited.
Okay, but you'll be right. You would get some data from some of the public sort of like institutes as part of that whole entire drug discovery.
No, because our innovation mostly is in terms of developing the solution technology, what our customers who are basically manufacturing the therapies, am I right, they need. So we are not directly connected with the clinical side of the play actually. And that's why our exposure is slightly limited. So what we try to provide our customers solution when they want to do those trials, what support they need, that's what we provide in that space.
So I think just to, I guess, just wrap up on that one is, yes, there's a lot of patient data. Singapore is not far behind. The data is being collected and has been collected for decades now. The issue is, has been brought up sort of like along the way in the discussion, is they were not collected in a systematic and in similar fashion from one year or even week to the other. So it really depends who was doing it and who was collecting and at what stage they were actually collecting. So trying to get a lot of this data incorporated and making sense of it is actually very, very difficult. So yes, you can have access to the data, but having access to the data, as we touched on at the very, very start of the webinar, will mean nothing at all if you cannot make sense of it and you don't know what they're actually looking for. So it's just data and just a bunch of like binary numbers at the end of the day, right? If it's electronic.
And Karen, if I may just add to that. Yes. So it depends on, to Joydip's point, what is the problem you're trying to solve? And do you need 100% of your data to be accurate? Sometimes you just need that directionally appropriate data. So maybe 85% of it's correct, and the 15% is just, a little bit of a gray area. But if that 85% can help drive decision-making, then that's good enough for what you need it for at that time. And you'll never have a complete data set. Honestly, it's really hard to get a complete data set. But it's good to work with what you have and get directionally appropriate data.
Okay, so we have another question. I think we might be able to take two more if possible, but next one comes from Sylvia. We often talk about the era of precision medicine and how the clinical outcomes can improve with personalizing healthcare. Can any of the panelists share how they envision data-driven approaches would be able to reduce inherent inter-patient variability?
Actually, I would say that the challenge is not the data-driven approach. It's a question of what is the methodology you are using to get to that point. Because the funny thing is, if you think about everyday machine learning or everyday AI techniques, they're trying to actually say that every patient is governed by the same principle. They're not different. It's just they're in different, their values are different, and so their risk is different. Whereas we need to go more from that to a type of modeling, if you may say, where we actually say that no, actually patients are not exactly the same, and one model or one set of principles of how these things come together to define risk cannot capture everything that you observe. You have to, the methodologies, different set of methodologies actually need to be used to get to that answer. Does it make it computationally far more cumbersome? Hell yeah. And again, going back, is that needed, right? Does it actually matter that I can precisely say what's going to happen to this patient? Does it truly matter? We have not yet seen, at least in clinical care settings, that we want to push it there. In more research settings, you can start analyzing the inter-individual variability. Where does it come from? And more of a research part, I think that is more relevant today. That's what I would say.
Anyone else would like to add?
No, I think I agree with Dr. Joy. You know what he's put it nicely. I think, and this is a space I think the cell therapy has the head start. I would say it has got a nice space where it's mostly autologous treatment, designed for the patient, and quite a bit of success has taken place, particularly treating the blood cancer patients. But the journey is still long, right? There is still, we need to go deeper onto the science to see and create that level of personalized, plans. I think it's still some way for us to cross.
And I'll just add to that, right now we think of health outcomes as being between a provider and a patient. And I think it's so much more than that. And in order to actually get to precision medicine, you need reliable data to inform you on everything else that's surrounding that patient. Because you only have a very small picture of what a patient's real life is like when you look at their EHR. So until those processes change and the patient gets to be part of that decision making, I think it'll be a little ways away before we get there.
I mean, we talk about precision medicine. We work in behavioral health most of the time. The behavioral health and the physical health don't talk to each other. You can get one or the other, can't even both. You're like, how the hell is that happening? So imagine precision and personalized is far, far away. Just getting a holistic picture of the patient that is actually in the healthcare system somewhere is, a smaller hurdle.
I mean, totally agree with you guys. And I think that's where it is, right? I think the term is very encompassing and can be quite deep. The reality of the matter is we are only at the start of the journey. Even the human genome is not fully mapped out yet, to tell you honestly. I mean, you have the basic, knowledge. And ultimately, does it really matter, right?
Exactly.
That's going to be the crux. And yes to some, no to others. So I think it's an evolving journey. And I think data, so I think data is inherently there, right? And you want to drive it, the data, that's fine if you want to use the terminology of it. But I think we're coming back to, is the outcome truly worth sort of like your focus on just pure data? And is the collection and the effort of collecting all this data worth the outcome? It's kind of chicken, egg, and where we're going to go with this. So I think, as we go along this journey of life, we do what we know best, right? But really focusing on, does it really matter to someone at the end of the day, how this data is being used and what it's being used for. Okay, so I think, do we have time? We might have time for one more question, and it's circling back to sort of like the data privacy. Alvin's asking, so talking about data privacy and strict regulations coming up in various countries as mentioned, do you think that it is restricting or progressing the development of AI solutions? I think we did touch upon this a bit, and this can be in the case of a company trying to internationalize their AI solution, having international collaborations or R&D. So anyone want to share more from what has been shared?
I don't think it's blocking. It's really not blocking. You just have to be compliant. You need to know the regulations, need to get compliant, plan it as a part of your process. When you approach a company, approach an organization, let's say you build something in US and you're taking it to different parts of US, or you're taking it to UK or Europe, it's okay to say we're not compliant right now, but we will be by the time we implement. And no hospital is going to say, well, if you're not GDPR compliant, I can't talk to you. Nobody does that, right? So in that way, building collaborations, doing R&D, and so that's one. Two, from an R&D perspective, also keep in mind that a lot of it is de-identified data or anonymized data. So as long as you follow those principles, the burden does get down a little bit. So the burden on PHI data versus de-identified data is different. So R&D is even easier in some ways. So I don't think it's blocking.
And I think it depends on what level you're engaged with, right? If you're from that research perspective, you deal with de-identified data, then yeah, it's about the same. But I think if you're a new startup and you're looking to pilot with a big organization and they give you the list of technical documentation that you have to meet,
300 pages.
Okay, well, we're not going to go for that client. I think from that perspective, it is limiting potentially. But of course, it depends on the organization, and maybe they're comfortable with minimum viable security until you have enough money to do something.
Yeah, I mean, that's actually a good point, Sean. In many cases, organizations would say, okay, let's create a sandbox within which we will run your thing so that it's really not integrated with everything else. The threat is much less, and let's try it out a small scale. And you guys also create what it will actually take to comply. Those compliance things sometimes are very, very involved, like a few months. But I don't think that's necessarily because of the increasing regulation. And we have faced them even 2 years back, 300-page documents from large organizations. So no escaping it at some point.
Excellent. So I think we are on the dot at 12 o'clock. So let me just quickly summarize, and I might or might not do a good job of this, but we talk about data, all sort of like types of data, and for patient, it's not only a biological patient sort of like data, right? We were talking about things, from the environmental data, the biological, of course, for sure, and then after that, cultural data, corporations data, it's kind of a big gamut of data that will eventually help a patient in terms of efficiency, in terms of patient healthcare. And I think we looked at that, just having that as a brief background will help you understand, what sort of data one needs depending on the outcome one is trying to achieve for that patient, right? I think we look at also, look here, cybersecurity is here to stay, really nothing is fully private or unhackable. It is the governance around it, is your processes, is your understanding, how you segment your data and how one needs to protect it. That's key. And I think at the end of the day, when we look at this, it's the full, outcomes. It's really what's going to matter for the patient itself. And all of these should support that outcome, as opposed to just having an effort of gathering the data and making sure you have the biggest data set so that you can do something. It's just wondering whether you can do something first before one goes out there to go and fish for the data. So I think thank you so much to the panelists, Joydip, Rajan, Sean, for taking the time to talk about it. Thank you very much to the audience for giving the questions in. And I'm going to hand it over to you, Zin.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Karen, Sean, Rajan, Joydip, for sharing your perspective into data and healthcare. The discussion has been very insightful for me, and I'm sure our community members here today greatly benefit from the knowledge sharing. We hope this conversation will continue offline, and there will be greater strides in data-driven approaches and privacy for better patient care. And if you'd like to revisit the conversation and past topics in the Promise of Deep Tech series presented by StartCentral and SGInnovate, we'll be sending a post-event email with the link to the recordings. And also, please connect with us on our various social media channels in the chat box on your right. And do mark your calendars in October for our next Promise of Deep Tech event. So without any more delay, we hope to see you soon and have a great rest of the week. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.